Hey there, pull up a chair. Today we need to talk about something that's probably lived in the quiet spaces of your life for a very, very long time. Picture this. You're standing in the driveway. Maybe you're heading back to your own place after a weekend visit. Or maybe you've just picked your dad up from the airport. You reach out, and there's that split second of hesitation, and instead of a real, genuine embrace, you settle for that stiff, slightly awkward side hug. Or maybe it's the classic man shake with the aggressive back pat. Look, we have all been there.
It's a really heavy question, isn't it? Why is it just so hard to hug Dad? There's often this silent pain that both men feel right there in that driveway moment. We love our fathers deeply. For a lot of us, they are our absolute biggest heroes. But for some reason, once we hit 18 or 20, the idea of just giving the man a real solid hug feels like trying to speak a language we never quite learned. We desperately want to express that deep mutual admiration, but that physical hesitation, it just always gets in the way.
Listen, if you feel that barrier, I want to say something incredibly important right up front. You are not broken, and honestly, your relationship with your dad isn't failing either. What you are experiencing here is an inherited emotional containment. It's a very specific, very Western cultural inheritance. This distance, it isn't a personal failure on your part, and it's not a failure on your father's part either. You're both just operating under a set of rules that were written long before you were even born.
Take a look at this number, 10. I kind of want to just let that sink in for a second, because I'll be honest, this statistic completely broke my heart when I first saw it in the research. Millions of Western fathers stop hugging their children by the time those kids turn 10 years old. By the time a little boy is 10, that whole childhood window of being carried and cuddled, it just begins to slam shut.
And it doesn't stop there, right? By the time a boy reaches age 14, a staggering 61% of fathers have completely stopped showing tactile affection. They've just stopped the hugs entirely. Why? Well, as boys hit puberty, fathers usually shift to what psychologists call verbal affection. They give advice, they provide guidance. They do this because they worry their son is getting too old for cuddles, or that it might make the boy uncomfortable. So we're trained to stand on our own 2 feet, and somehow, along the way, standing on your own became synonymous with not touching.
But here's the truly wild thing. It actually wasn't always like this. Let's zoom out to history for a second. Back in the mid-1800s, deep male intimacy was totally normalized. Abraham Lincoln shared a bed with his close friend Joshua Speed for years, and nobody batted an eye. It was entirely unremarkable. But then we hit a massive turning point with the 1895 trial of Oscar Wilde. When Wilde was convicted for gross indecency, it sent a complete shockwave through the Western world. Suddenly, male intimacy was criminalized. And as we moved into the 1950s with the Lavender Scare, where the government literally fired men just for being suspected of having close male bonds, the policing of male touch became absolute.
The crucial point here is that men didn't just suddenly stop wanting to be close to their friends and their sons. Actually, scratch that, they were literally trained to view emotional restraint as a strict requirement for survival. Touch carried a massive social cost. To touch another man was to risk being labeled as deviant. This fear birthed a whole era of hard masculinity, where emotional distance wasn't just preferred, it was socially enforced.
Which brings us to a concept psychologists call the man box. It's basically this set of rigid and visible rules demanding self-sufficiency, acting tough, and above all else, avoiding vulnerability. Today, about 59% of young American men feel a massive pressure to act strong even when they are terrified. When we live inside this box, we develop typical male defenses. We learn to turn our sadness into anger, because anger feels powerful and masculine, while sadness, well, that just feels like a dangerous liability.
And man, this completely alters how we communicate when someone we love is hurting. Think about the word commiserate. It literally means to be miserable together. But when our fathers are struggling, our instinct isn't to hug them or commiserate. Our instinct is to give advice. We want to be the hero who fixes dad's problems. But think about how that actually lands. When you give your dad advice instead of a hug, it often feels like criticism to him. It creates this weird hierarchy where you're the resourceful one and he's the clueless one, instead of just being two humans sharing a quiet, simple moment of connection.
And there is a heavy, hidden cost to all of this. We are talking about the mental health cost of believing that needing others is a weakness. Men who adhere to those rigid rules, men who are stuck inside the man box, meet the screening standards for depression at a rate of 41%. For men outside that box, it drops to 26%. We are looking at a literal crisis of male loneliness and suicidal ideation, all rooted in this cultural inheritance that tells us isolation equals strength.
Now, I know exactly what you might be thinking. You're saying, my dad just isn't a hugger. That's just who he is.
And it's true, many of our fathers were raised in an even more restrictive box than we were. But Dr. Corey Floyd's research brings us some incredible hope here in this explainer. He outlines 2 ways we develop affection. The modeling hypothesis says you copy what you saw, so a warm dad creates a warm son. But the compensation hypothesis, well, that is where the magic is. That hypothesis shows that men who grew up with distant, unaffectionate fathers often actively compensate for it. They think, I never got the hugs I needed, so I'm going to make absolutely sure my own son never feels that void. And that beautifully illustrates what Floyd calls the U-shaped relationship of affection. Basically, it means the men who are the most affectionate with the next generation are either the ones who had the most affectionate fathers or the ones who had the most distant fathers. If you feel a massive emotional distance with your dad today, I really want you to realize how much that empowers you. You are not doomed to repeat it. You can literally be the man who bends the arc of your family history back toward closeness.
But as we navigate all this, we also have to respectfully acknowledge how older generations operate. For so many men, love speaks through a side-by-side connection. It's tossing a baseball. It's passionately debating the stats of your favorite sports teams. It's acts of service, like fixing your brakes or bringing you a hot plate of biryani. These are shared rituals. They are quiet, deeply powerful placeholders for the words "I love you," used by men who are taught that face-to-face vulnerability was completely forbidden.
Now, those acts of service are beautiful, but we still need to push for the physical hug, because our biology literally demands closeness. Humans are physically wired for touch. When we embrace, our bodies release serotonin to regulate our mood and cortisol to fight off stress. A real hug is a literal chemical reset for your entire nervous system. It communicates deep safety and protection to your brain in a way that an "I love you" spoken over the phone simply cannot do. So, how do we actually do this without it being incredibly weird? Let's walk through psychotherapist Hilary Jacobs Hendel's steps for what she calls the therapeutic hug. It breaks down a terrifying emotional action into a manageable sequence. Step 1, you stand chest to chest, belly to belly. Absolutely no side hugs. Step 2, you take a deep, slow breath yourself because your breathing rhythm will actually help calm your dad's nervous system down. And step 3, and this is the absolute most important one, you stay in the hug and you wait for them to pull away first.
I know. Just hearing those steps probably made your heart race a little bit, right? It sounds super awkward, and your internal man-box programming is probably screaming at you right now that this is weak or overly sentimental. Validate that fear, for sure, but push through it. Because stepping into that embrace is profoundly healing. It is a physical way of saying, I see your humanity and I'm letting you see mine. Male loneliness is a learned cultural inheritance. It is not a biological destiny. We were trained to avoid touch, which means we can be untrained.
Which brings us to a final thought to leave you with today. The next time you are standing in that driveway with your dad, will you skip the handshake? Will you hold the hug for just 1 second longer than feels comfortable? Because that 1 second of too long is exactly where the healing happens, brother. It's where 20 years of unspoken affection finally gets a chance to breathe. It's a resource that is completely free, and honestly, you both probably need it way more than you realize. Now, go get that hug.